So I did a story on the never-ending infinity war on abortion last week, and if you haven't seen that video, please go check it out. There have been a plethora of abortion bills passed just this year alone, I think 7, 8 or something at this point, where states either ban abortion past around the 6-week mark, where not a heartbeat per se, but cardiac activity is detected in the fetus, and that's, in my view, pretty insane. As I explained in that video, I think it's pretty insane. Alabama outright bans abortion, just outright bans it. Obviously, all of these things currently are unconstitutional, but if they bring it to the Supreme Court, there is a fight to be had, and there is considerations that the current Supreme Court could very well overturn Roe v. Wade. But today, we're just going to look at the public opinion around this, okay? Forget my opinion. Forget what I think about abortion. Let's just look at what the public has to say. This is supposed to be a democracy, right? We're supposed to base our laws around what the general consensus is. So let's look at the consensus as of now on the current emerging abortion bills. So the first poll we're going to look at, this one comes from Morning Consult. Whites, Republicans most likely to back Georgia, Alabama abortion laws. But the more important headline here is that out of all voters, 56% oppose this measure, 12% are unsure, don't know, and 33% support. So admittedly, that 33% is higher than I expected. I expected it to be in the high 20s, but 33%, that's pretty bad. Okay, that is a third of the country. That's a very slim minority as far as I'm concerned. You know, in my opinion, if something is 55% or 56% favorable, it's basically approaching open and shut territory. And we can also assume, by the way, that out of that 12% that don't know, probably half of those could be convinced to oppose it. So you can basically assume this is at least a 60% majority support or opposition to these bills. Now, in Democrat territory, it is overwhelming. Obviously, that makes sense. In Republican territory, it's overwhelming in favor of this, but not as overwhelming as you'd expect. 31% of Republicans still totally oppose this. That's a pretty large amount of Republicans. For a lot of Republican issues, you're hard-pressed to find a 20% support for the more liberal perspective. In this case, you have a 31% support for the more liberal perspective. So that is fascinating. And as usual, whites, they tend to be a little more conservative, and this finds nothing any different. It's a slightly lower opposition to these bills for whites than the general consensus, but still pretty close, right? 54% oppose this, even among whites, and with blacks, it's overwhelming. That is to be expected as well. Now, let's look at another poll. This one is from YouGov, and this is specifically talking about the Alabama law, which outright bans abortion. It outright bans. And this one, I'm a little surprised by this. I would have expected these numbers to be a little bit higher, but still pretty stark, right? I believe that's about 43% strongly oppose, and roughly, I think it's 12%, 13% that strongly or somewhat disapprove. So in total, you're still looking at about 56 to 57%. I believe for this one, the total is actually 57 disapprove. And so when you go to the approve category, you're seeing about 11% somewhat, nearly 20% strongly. So again, very low 30s approve of this. And when you look at, look at strongly approve versus somewhat approve, those somewhat approved people may have decided, okay, well, maybe up to 6 weeks it should be okay, or we should, allow for cases of rape, which were not included in this, right? The Alabama bill only specifies that abortions are okay if the life of the mother is in danger. They don't even care about incest or rape, okay? So that's pretty fucking stringent. And you are seeing very, very low support for this. This is pretty stark, guys. Now, I got one more queued up for you before we look at the historical trends of this, but this one is also from Morning Consult. Now, despite polarized extremes on abortion, most voters fall somewhere in the middle. Now, this one breaks it down even further and looks at very detailed analysis of this proposal, of these proposals. So, legal in all circumstances, okay? That's a pretty hard line. That's like, right up to the birth, okay? Even for that, which is a pretty hardline position, you see 34% of Democrats, 22% of all voters, even 9% of Republicans, legal abortion in all circumstances. That's pretty striking. Now, you go to legal until fetal viability, which is the current standard of up to 26 to 28 weeks. So for that, it is overwhelming. Okay, for Democrats, it's 66%. For Republicans, when you combine those totals, of course, so 32 for just this opinion. But when you combine the totals, it's 66, and for Republicans, it's 25. And for all voters, it is 47. So not quite as striking when you consider all voters, but still very close to a majority. Now, don't know, no opinion is in the middle there, but illegal except in cases of rape, incest, and risk to mother's life. So that includes things that are not included in Alabama and are not included in some of these other states as well. But for that, it is overwhelming, even for Republicans, that they will support illegal except in rape, incest, and risk to the mother's life. So the Alabama bill, most Republicans would break with, okay, because it does not cover rape or incest. So that's pretty striking. You can get Republicans to really come over on some of these more key points of this. When you talk about the specifics, you can get them to come over pretty easily, I think. So that shows they are not beyond reaching to some extent. And for Democrats, obviously, only 6% of Democrats say illegal in all circumstances. Only 11% of voters say illegal in all circumstances. Only 20% of Republicans say illegal in all circumstances. So only 20% of Republicans really hold to that core value that from the minute you're done fucking, it is a life, and killing any life inside the womb is murder. Only 20% of Republicans, the right party, far right, or the right-wing party. So this is pretty striking, guys. We are seeing some very strong support for the generally moderate view of abortion, that it should definitely be legal under a slew of circumstances. So I think this speaks for itself, honestly. Now, we're going to go ahead and look at the long-term view of the country on abortion, how it has changed over the years in terms of people calling themselves pro-choice versus pro-life, and just the general consensus on it, legal under certain circumstances or all circumstances, etc. So let's go ahead and pull up Gallup. So these are numbers going all the way back to the 70s. Some of these only go back to the 90s, but let's look at the first one here. Do you think abortion should be legal under any circumstances, legal under certain circumstances, or illegal in all? So the best one there is legal only under certain circumstances. Now, that's pretty broad, right? That can include, legal only if you're raped, only if there was incest or the life of the mother is in danger. But it could also include up to viability, up to 26 weeks. So that's a large portion, right? That, honestly, we should break this down into probably a more detailed analysis, because that's a pretty big difference from only rape and incest and life of the mother in danger versus being able to abort up to 26 weeks, which is the current standard. So, that's pretty big differences there. But when you look at the general trend, interestingly, that portion actually decreases from 54 to 50%. That's fascinating, and we're going to be getting to some theories on that in a second. But strangely, though, when the one that has increased the most over this period, right, is actually the hardline pro-abortion stance of legal under any circumstances. It has gone from 22 to 29%, nearly getting close to approaching a third of the country is saying legal under any circumstances. So right up to birth, okay? That's considered by most to be a hardline position, but it has grown 7% in this time frame, right? It is the biggest growth that you see on this chart, on this trend. Now, for illegal in all circumstances, you've seen a drop from 21% to 18%. So while the top one has faltered there, the top consensus has faltered there, the consensus on the right has decreased, and the consensus on the hard left has actually increased. So that's striking. That is fascinating right there. I don't know what to make of that, honestly. Please leave your opinion on this down in the comments below, and I will be reading that. I would really love to hear what you have to say on this, but let's move on to the next one. With respect to the abortion issue, so this is solely based on rhetoric. Would you consider yourself to be pro-choice or pro-life? Me, I would say pro-choice. I lean pretty heavily in the pro-choice camp, although I tend to consider myself a fairly moderate, maybe moderate left a little more left than some people. I think that there are pretty good arguments for going past that 26 weeks of viability. Certainly in the case of incest, rape, life of mothers in danger, obviously past those. I would go fairly far past those, but it seems that 99% of abortions happen before 26 weeks. So it seems like people have the general ability to get an abortion before that period, right? That's a pretty extensive amount of time to get this done. So, I think we should increase access by increasing availability and decreasing price. Obviously, that's kind of the crux of it, but, I'm willing to hear arguments, is what I'm saying. So, with respect to pro-choice versus pro-life, pro-choice has actually wavered pretty considerably. Now, this is the interesting trend that we want to talk about today, and what I have a bit of a theory on that a commenter posed to me that was pretty fascinating. Pro-choice has gone from 56 to 48. So there's been a pretty consistent either propaganda or messaging campaign that has been successful in dropping the rate of people who are willing to call themselves pro-choice. Now, back in the day, pro-life was doing pretty terribly there, right? 33%. I mean, that's horrible, right? I mean, it's just flat out horrible. A third of the country is in support of pro-life, not very much of a movement. And that's in a Christian country, by the way. A Christian country only had 33% support for the pro-life stance outright. So then we move up, we see a sharp increase to 44%, and then it kind of wavers, but it just kind of goes all over the map, and then eventually we get to what is today, and it actually came all the way up to 51% at one point, but today it's at 48%. So as of 2018, it is tied with pro-choice. Pro-life is tied effectively with pro-choice as of 2018. Now, I'll be very interested to see the 2019 numbers on that, but that's pretty striking. Over a little over 20 years, we had a swing from very pro-choice in this country to pretty much a wash, right? Pretty much a wash. So that is fascinating. Now, like I said, I was going to come back to a bit of a theory on this, and this is something that a commenter raised to me. It's called the Roe effect. Now, this is a way to possibly explain that radical shift in numbers, okay? That's, like I said, that's a pretty radical shift in numbers on this. And the Roe effect is a hypothesis about the long-term effect of abortion on the political balance of the United States, which suggests that since supporters of the legalization of abortion cause the erosion of their own political base because they support abortion, so they are perhaps more likely to get abortions and not have offspring, the practice of abortion will eventually lead to the restriction of illegalization of abortion. So essentially, people who are pro-life will have kids because they're pro-life, and then people who are pro-choice will not have kids because, they favor abortion, and they may be more likely to get an abortion. It just stands to reason, I would imagine. So since the pro-lifers are having kids, they're raising kids who are pro-life, and the pro-choicers who are not having kids are not replacing the kids who would otherwise be pro-choice because they're being raised by a pro-choice family. Now, I don't know how much this is borne out in the evidence, but this is an interesting hypothesis considering, again, going back to the polls, pro-choice versus pro-life, there has been a staggering shift on this, right? So that's fascinating. I really don't know if this is borne out in the scientific evidence. I would like to see studies on this, but if we just look at polling, it is fascinating because, again, going back to the other thing, though, the hardline stance on the left has seen some support, whereas the hardline stance on the right has seen a decrease. So it's a wash, right? There's not a definite trend supporting this right here, supporting the Roe effect. So it's something interesting to consider. I don't know that it's happening, frankly. The general trend in the West is that births are being abridged, right? We are seeing a decline in the rate at which people are being replaced, right? And the birth of new people. We're seeing, in general, the amount of offspring people have is a downward trend. It's down from, I think, the highest in this country at one point was like 3 kids per family or approaching 3 kids per family. We're now less than 2 think we're at like 1.4 or something like that. I don't know these numbers right off the top of my head. I just know that it is definitely a downward trend. And across the West, where they've instituted policies allowing for abortion, birth control, and wide-scale, providing of condoms and contraception, we have seen a downward trend. So, and by the way, that's on the whole good, right? We definitely need to control the growth of human beings because, keep it real, we use a lot of resources and this world can only sustain so many of us. That's pretty much uncontroversial at this point. So I don't know, man. Like, where do you fall on this? Like, do you think this Roe effect is actually happening? And do you join me in saying the overwhelming popularity of at least a well-regulated abortion basically just rebuts the entire movement towards outright bans and very severe limitations, 6 weeks, and criminality, by the way, posing criminal penalties for doing these things, right? 10 to 30 years in some cases, giving the doctor up to virtually life in prison, 99 years. So it seems like the general, to this day, and I believe this trend will remain regardless of the Roe effect, it seems that abortion, when fairly regulated, is overwhelmingly popular. Overwhelmingly popular to, at the very least, be legal and be regulated up to a certain point, okay? I'm not saying abortion right up to birth, okay? That's not my position, but I think the standard that was set of 26 weeks viability is reasonable. It's reasonable. 99% of abortions happen before that. So, I don't know. Please leave your comments down in the section below, and also join us on Discord. That's where we have discussions on these things, or at least I would like discussions on those things where people are really interested in. They're not just demagoguing, they're not just leaving comments to be hateful and to be rude, but they're really trying to have a discussion on these things. Please join us on Discord to fight this stuff out in a meaningful way, and also propose ideas for stories you'd like me to cover in the future, people you'd like me to debate in the future, and also help us fight these algorithms. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, please share it, because we're fighting them hard. Those damn bastards don't want us to give an inch. So thank you so much for joining me today.